Dr. Duroshi here. The goal of this video is to help you understand how to use Biblearc's phrasing module, in which we're going to do what I call text hierarchy, to actually establish the flow of thought in a passage and to understand which clauses are of greater priority than others, which clauses are supportive of others, so that we can actually see the entire argument laid out before us. I'm going to share my screen with you, and you'll see that here I've got just an open. I'm in Google, and I'm going to type in Biblearc.com. It'll take me where I need to go. You need to have a subscription to Biblearc's tools module for this course. I anticipate that as you see the benefits of this resource, you're going to want to maintain your subscription. But for this course, it's one of the assigned resources, one of the necessary required resources for you to do what's going to need to happen in our exegesis class. So you see we're in Biblearc, and I'm going to go first up to the top left to the 3 lines, the hamburger, and go down to create a new project. So create a new project, and you see this blank screen. Just right of the middle of the screen, you'll see a plus sign, and that's where we're going to begin. We're going to push plus, and we're going to go down to phrasing because we're going to be using the phrasing module. So push phrase, and all of a sudden now we need to pick our text. You'll see over in the left-hand side, it has ESV, Hebrew plus Greek, New American Standard, NIV 11, Septuagint. What we want to start with is the Hebrew and Greek. So I'm going to push Hebrew and Greek, and then we need to pick our text. And for the sake of just this exercise, let's go to one of Moses's prophetic speeches in Exodus 19, very familiar passage. So we're going to go to Exodus. Then notice it says chapter 1. So we actually need to move our mouse all the way down to Exodus 19, and we're going to go from verses 4 to 6. And down here in the window at the bottom, it tells you that's your text, and we're going to push check. And so up comes the Hebrew text, and I want to add now, just for the sake of my preparation and critique, the New American Standard. I encourage you to use that over the ESV because the New American Standard includes many more conjunctions, and they are necessary for the exercise at hand. So we're going to pick the New American Standard. To do that, we go back to where it says Exodus 19, 4 through 6 in the top left hand of the screen. We push it, and we go to the plus next to Hebrew and Greek, and we want to add NASB. And we have it in 2-column view, as you can see, and that's exactly what we want. Just click outside the box, and it takes us back. Now, this text is quite small, and so for the sake of this exercise, I'm actually going to push Command plus and make things a little bit bigger. In doing that, I've lost my notes. It's pushed it down to the bottom of the screen, and for the sake of this exercise, I'm just going to push that all the way out. I'm going to go to the minimize arrow button right over here and just push that down. It'll take it away. So as we look at this screen, you see the Hebrew text on the left, the English text on the right, and then there's a window at the bottom. That's the editing window, and you'll see in the editing window there's a series of tabs. There's the indent tab, edit tab, sections, arrows plus, text, and size. Now, under sizing, you can actually go there. What I did is actually expanded my screen so I could see it on my big screen better, but you could actually go to the sizing and increase the text size here. We could increase the Hebrew text size, as you're seeing, and then we could also go to spacing over on the right and increase the space between each of the verses. And so that will actually help us visualize what's going to go on. The other element that's in this is the spacing of tabs, and tabs are going to be fundamental to all we're going to be doing within the phrasing module. So we want to make sure that when I tab a clause in, showing that it's indented and therefore in some way depending on, supporting, or expanding a clause that precedes or a unit that precedes, that the distance between the main line and the embedded or embedded material is big enough so that I can actually visually distinguish it. First step in phrasing is to break apart our clauses. And often with a share, this is one of the instances where I don't always break out clauses, where there's a share clause functioning attributively, like an adjective. Every adverbial a share clause is actually expanding the nature of the argument, whereas adjectival a share clauses are just functioning descriptively, like an adjective would, telling us more about a noun. But there are times, even where there's an a share clause, as we're going to see in this instance, and a share clause that I do want to break it apart because there's going to be a series of a share clauses. Now, fundamental to text hierarchy, using the phrasing module is, and this is fundamental to biblical Hebrew, is to understand the role of vav or wow and ascendaton. Ascendaton is asyndetic, that is the lack of conjunction. And you might think the lack of conjunction means nothing, but actually it means something functionally in Hebrew. Whenever you see a chain of clauses linked by and, there is movement. And as soon as you come to an ascendaton, the lack of conjunction, there is pause. And functionally within a discourse, it raises the question, what is this pause for? And there's two main reasons that we'll see asyndetic clauses, either to start a fresh beginning, like in a speech, the very beginning of a speech. 99.9% of all speeches in the Old Testament begin with ascendaton because they're not connected to anything that precedes. Whereas the connector, usually vav, shows what the connector vav does is it links clauses of equal syntactic value or propositions of equal syntactic value, phrases to phrases, clauses to clauses, paragraphs to paragraphs, or even books to books. So you can have canonical vavs that are actually linking two different books, like we find in the book of Exodus, Leviticus, or Numbers, that are actually conjoining the entire book to what precedes, or a vav like it appears at the beginning of Jonah, the only one of the minor prophets that start with vav, and it suggests that at least the chronicler wanted us to read Jonah in relationship to the preceding book, which is Obadiah. So Obadiah talks about the pride of Edom. And then we see the connection with Jonah, who represents Israel. The prophet represents the people, and God's charge against Jonah, and through him the people, is don't be like Edom in being proud at someone else's destruction. Just as Edom was proud at Jerusalem's fall, so Jonah is wanting to be proud at Nineveh's fall. And so there seems to be an intentional connection between those books, and it's all connected by the vav. So we enter into our text here, and it starts with a quotation, and we see, you have seen. What have you seen? It comes to us through this share clause. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to push indent because that's where we're going to start. And So you see, I'm down here in the editing box and I push the far left tab indent. And what that does is it opens up the opportunity for these tabs within the body of the text to become live. When you are under the edit mode, those tabs are not there. But as soon as you have indent, you can go grab that and move it wherever you want. You can move it in. Now, right there, we see the width of the tab, and it's not massive. So I'm actually going to expand the tab stops in both the English and the Hebrew, and I'm going to do that by going down to sizing, and I'm going to make the tab stops bigger. Look with me. As I touch this, I've gone 2, 3, 4, 5. And now I'm going to go over to the English side, and I'm going to do the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we've got tabs. And every time I move that indent, it's going to, I'm going to go back to the indent. Every time I use it, it's going to make it a big tab stop. And that's going to let me visualize what I need to visualize. So let's consider this text right off the bat. First thing we're going to do is just go through all 3 verses and distinguish the clauses. As I said, all of this is an extended quotation until we get down to the end of verse 6. So we start in the English text. It's got that quote here. You have seen. Now, the New American Standard says you yourselves have seen, and it does that, I believe, because the you is unnecessary. It is fronted, but it's already built into this katal form, this Hebrew perfect form. So we've got the katal of ra'ah in the second masculine plural. You have seen. So the only reason to front this with an atem is if it was wanting to mark something. You yourselves have seen. You have seen what? What have you seen? You have seen that which I did to Egypt, to the Egyptians. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians or to Egypt. And now, as soon as we come here to this vayiktol form, or vayiktol form rather, all of a sudden we have to try to figure out what's going on here. What's this and linked to? Is it linked to you have seen and I carried? I don't think so. This is part of what they have seen. They have seen that God carried them. You've seen what I did. You've seen that I lifted or bore you on wings of eagles. So here we're having a chain of clauses, all of them that are expressing the direct object of what Israel saw. And all of them are clauses. All of them have finite verbs. So I'm actually going to, all I have to do, you can see when I'm under the indent tab, wherever I put this in the Hebrew text, it allows that red line comes up and I just click it. And it puts it in a new clause. And for the sake of what we're doing, I'm going to just track it. Go to the next one. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You saw that I lifted you on the wings of eagles. And you saw that I brought you, here it is again, and I brought you to myself. And now. So let's just start right there. This va'etah marks a shift in the discourse. It's actually what I call a discourse marker that's operating not at the clause level, but at the text level. So we'll see that in a second. It's actually an inference marker. It's drawing an inference from what precedes this va'atah, and that clarifies what this unit is above. You have seen what. Now, the fact that this what, or that which, is giving clarity to what was seen, it's actually supportive, it's expanding, it's dependent. And that dependency is seen in the way it's marking the direct object. So every dependent clause I indent. But it's not just that Israel saw what God did. They saw how he brought, how he carried. And so this vav is actually linking to this relative particle, asher. And so it creates an embedded chain of clauses, all of which are related. You've seen what I did. You've seen, and in English, we have to add a new demonstrative. You've seen what, you've seen that, and you've seen that I brought you to myself. So we actually have this embedded unit. It's called a text block. Whenever you move beyond a single clause to other clauses that are linked to it by and, all of them are related and they create a text block. It could start with a senditon, or it could start with, in this instance, a subordinate conjunction. So you've seen three things. You've seen what I did, you've seen that I carried, and you've seen that I brought. And these vayiktols are building off this katal, that is the conjoined perfects or conjoined imperfects, whatever, however you, not conjoined perfects, conjoined imperfects, or vav consecutive imperfects, or as I refer to them just by their form, vayiktols. These vayiktols are building in a little narrative that's embedded into the speech, all of which begins with this asher clause that itself has a katal. So there's a story that's being told. You saw what I did to Egypt. You saw what that I lifted you on wings of eagles, and you saw that I brought you to myself. Now, therefore. So the very fact that we have a therefore, it's drawing the therefore or the and now in 19.5 is actually showing that the inference is always the strongest element. The conclusion is stronger than the ground. And what it means is that verse 4 is actually a ground, a basis for something. And because of that, logically, we're going to indent it. So I'm actually going to highlight the atem, and then I'm going to go all the way down, push my shift button, and go all the way down to the end, and you're going to see all of the clauses light up with red. Now I can grab at any point any of these clauses and just move them all one tier to the left, because all of this unit, beginning with you have seen, the implication is because you have seen, now therefore, this is the conclusion that I'm drawing. This is the implications of the fact that you've seen how I brought you out of Egypt to myself, to the mountain where we now stand. So all of this is dependent. Now we go over to the English side and just notice how we can track this. You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians. Well, we can just push, you've seen what I did, and all of a sudden the English text aligns with the Hebrew text in the phrasing module. You've seen what I did, you've seen how I carried, and you've seen how I brought you to myself. And all of a sudden there's a direct parallel between the Hebrew and its translation. Now, at some point, we're going to want to correct the translation. And in this instance, if you were convinced that what we're seeing here is actually Egypt, Mitzrayim, rather than Egyptians, you could change the text. And to do that, we would go down to Edit. And now, even though it originally was the NASB, we can just click on the text and highlight what I want to change and then just retype it. What I did to Egypt. And then it's up to you if you would want to note everywhere where you actually change the New American Standard, say you just want to put it into red, well, you can do that. You can go over here to text, down in the editing window, go to text, and notice it says text color. So go to text color. Right now it's on this rusty red, that's fine. And I want to note that I just changed Egypt from to the Egyptians to Egypt. And I'm going to leave it right there, and then I'll just say done. Now I can go back to my indent and I continue working on my text hierarchy within the phrasing module itself. So, and now this is a text level marker showing that what follows, and it's not just one clause, it's an entire text. This text is drawing an inference from what precedes. And so as a clause marker, a discourse marker rather, that's not actually governing a clause, but governing an entire text, even though it's not a clause itself, I'm going to set it apart. So I'm actually going to leave this as the marker, the signal that everything that follows is an inference from what precedes. And now, if. Now that if, that im, in the Hebrew text is a subordinate conjunction. So automatically, I know that I am being set up to see a two-part syntactical construction. And these two-part syntactic constructions could have a number of subordinate conjunctions. You could have when, then. You could have because, therefore. Or in this instance, it's if, and what we're expecting is a then clause or a then unit. And not always in Hebrew is both the if and the then, the when and the then, or the because and the therefore. Very rarely, actually, is it marked with both a subordinate and a primary conjunction. So we already saw that in 19.5a, only the inference marker was given. There's no conjunction in 19.4 signaling this is a because unit. Because you've seen what I did, now therefore. No, the Hebrew simply lays out what we call the protasis of this two-part syntactic construction. In this instance, a because, therefore, and it only uses the inferential particle to mark the apodosis, the second half of the unit. But now, within this within the apodosis itself, there's another protasis-apodosis construction, and we're going to see that the Hebrew only uses the subordinate conjunction im to signal the protasis. And so what we're looking for is another marker, not a conjunction, not an inferential particle. It could be there, but in this instance, we're not going to see it. We're going to be looking for some other major signal in the text to clarify for us that we are actually moving from the protasis into the apodosis. So let's just start working in the Hebrew text itself. But what we know is, moving to the text, this im is going to be subordinate, anticipating it's marking a protasis unit, which is by nature subordinate, this if part of the if then construction. And so because of that, it's going to be indented. So if, And now we get this infinitive absolute plus yiktol construction of Shema. If you will surely listen. Now, listen is central to all of Israel's existence. Think back, or in this instance, anticipate Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. Hear, listen, O Israel, Yahweh our God, Yahweh is one. Everything comes down, everything begins with proper hearing. So Israel needs to listen. If indeed you will surely listen unto my voice. So we got this if. And now, right away, we've got a new clause. You keep my covenant. Now, it could be, if you will listen to my voice, then you will keep my covenant. But what we'd be looking for is a major shift. And in this instance, we see that there's a shift from this infinitive absolute yiktol to a v'katal. That infinitive absolute plus yiktol construction sets the subjunctive context. It stresses the volitional, what they ought to do. So the question becomes, if you will do this in the future, if indeed you will do this, which is what you should do, then something will happen. But what we want to know is that the infinitive absolute plus yiktol would very naturally start the unit, noting its anticipatory, modal sense. This is what they ought to do. And if you do it, then. But if there had been a chain of if you do this and if you do this, right after you mark that pattern with yiktol, what would be automatically followed in anticipatory discourse is v'katal. That is a vav plus perfect construction. And that chain could go on in perpetuity for as many clauses as the narrator wanted to do. If you do this and do this and do this and do this. And here we see this v'katal construction with ushamertem. Ushamertem, and it's exactly what we would expect to follow the yiktol in the plural if we were expecting a chain of if clauses. So in the same way that asher up in 19.4b ended up controlling the vav, the two vav clauses that followed. It's as if it were, you have seen asher, v'asher, v'asher, but they don't have to repeat the asher. They can just add vav, and it assumes the continuation of the asher. You have seen what I did and how I lifted and how I brought. Similarly here, that if, when followed by a vav, indicates that the second clause is controlled by the im as much as the first clause is controlled by the im. So it's, if you will surely heed my voice, listen to my voice, and if you will keep my covenant. And now we come to a new clause. Another vav plus katal. Now, just let your eye move over to the New American Standard, and you'll see that it's at this point that the New American Standard actually says, here's where the apodosis starts. Here's where the then starts. So what they want to do is, and now then, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then. And so what they want to do is start the apodosis right here. Then you shall be my treasured, my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. But now look back at the Hebrew text. What we're looking for is a major signal in the text that tells us now's where the then clause begins. And as we look here, we begin with the yiktol that marks the future-oriented nature of the discourse. It's followed by a vukatal that matches the previous verb in gender and number. And now we come to the next verb. It's simply another vukatal. It looks, this v'yitem looks identical in form to the ushamertem that precedes. As if the point is actually, if you will indeed listen to my voice, and if you will keep my covenant, and if you will be for me a treasured possession from all the peoples, because all the earth is mine. And I suggest, because there is no signal in the Hebrew, that's exactly how we should be reading the text. That clause 19.5d is actually part of the protasis and not part of the apodosis. So we would be looking into 19.6 for the apodosis. So let's catch up here on our text hierarchy, just breaking out clauses. And now, if you will indeed keep or heed unto my voice, and if you will keep my covenant, and if you will be to me a treasured possession, to live as if you were prized by God, to live not as one who senses God is distant, but who knows God is close because he is for me, because he's redeemed me. Live that way. Amidst all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. Here we have a dependent clause. This key is giving a ground to what precedes. For all the earth is mine. Because all the earth is mine, yet I've chosen you. You need to live distinct, as if you are my prized possession. And not only that, keep my covenant. Listen to my voice. And if you will do this, because I've redeemed you, if you will do this, then something will happen. Verse 6 is what will happen. We go here and notice right away. We don't get another vukatal, vav plus perfect form. Instead, what we get is a vav plus pronoun form. And you shall be to me, New American Standard, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And then we enter out of the quotation. So I'm going to just put a line. Actually, I'm going to go edit. And for the moment, I'm just going to delete all the Hebrew there. Done. And I'm going to delete the English here. Done. And now when we come back, I can just delete that whole clause. And now we're left with only the quote itself. And you shall be for me two things, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, I think it's this use of an explicit pronoun that's unnecessary in the context, because notice we already have the plural yiktol right here. The pronoun is built into the yiktol form, the imperfect form. You shall be for me. This is an oughtness. This is directive speech. Sorry. This is not this is part of the anticipatory speech telling us what will be if Israel meets the condition. If you meet these conditions, then this is what's going to happen. You will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And I think it's that explicit pronoun that marks the necessary shift. We're looking for something in the text to distinguish between the protasis and the apodosis. So as I look at the Hebrew text, I think this is how we should be looking at things. And I'm just going to update my Hebrew text here I'm going to change this to, I'm going to delete in 19.5D on the New American Standard side. I'm going to delete it, and I'm going to note in red that I changed it. And then in 19.6, I'm going to edit. And I'm going to note that right here is where I'm going to put this apodosis. And I'm going to put a comma instead of the semicolon in 19.5E. So let's read it. New American Standard, now then, if you indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant and be my own possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, then you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now the English text represents what I understand the Hebrew text to be saying. But we can do more in the phrasing module than just this. Notice we have two main sections. You have a ground and you have an inference. And then within the inference, you have an if and a then. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to go down here to sections in my editing box, and notice there are three different areas, three different spheres, and I'm going to use all three right now. First, I'm going to put in a separator. So I push the separating button under the section tab, and it gives me all these pluses and minuses. And I'm going to distinguish between the because section. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. I'm going to just push that plus sign, and it'll put a long, wide break between the because section and the now therefore section. And then within the now therefore section, I'm going to distinguish the if and the then. And I do that just by this separator line. Now, if I look at this whole unit, I'm going to push done. If I look at the whole text, there is a natural flow of the text that indicates the main idea. The main idea is not the ground, it's the inference. And within the inference section, it's not the if portion, it's the then portion. So right here is my main idea. God is calling Israel to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Or we could say to mediate, that's what priests do. They mediate God to the people and mediate the people before God. But God's not just calling Israel to have priests, he's calling all the nation to be priests amidst the entire world. So all of Israel is being called by God, commissioned by God to be mediators, but also a holy nation. That is to bear in themselves a reflection of the holy God. They are to display God to the world. And in our minds, we should be thinking, okay, kingdom of priests and holy display. This should all remind us of the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve were called to be image bearers as priest kings. Now, Israel is like a new Adam, a new son of God, corporate son of God, that's being called to do and be what Adam was called to do and to be reflectors, resemblers, representers of God on earth through their mediating his greatness and through their display of his holiness. So this is a text about calling. So we have these sections, but they're distinct sections. So now I'm going to go down to, in the section tab in our editing box, I'm going to go down to new heading, because I want to actually put a heading in each of these major units that's able to distinguish for me the basis of Israel's calling and the nature of Israel's calling. So I push new heading, and you'll see there's all these heading spots that are all of a sudden lit up. And so I'm going to push the top one, heading spot, and I can make it any color I want. Let's make it green. And now down in this box, I'm going to start, and I'm just going to type in the basis of Israel's calling. And then I'm going to push done. And if you wanted to, you could push new heading again and put it over here on the English side. But for now, we'll leave that off. But next, I want to put it in a new heading spot. This time, let's make it yellow. And I'm going to say the nature of Israel's calling. That distinguishes our two units. You've got, and the units are growing out of our understanding of the text grammar. So far in Hebrew, all of you, even if you've made it through intermediate, but in first year Hebrew, so far, all that your professors have focused on most likely is clause grammar. You've learned about subjects and you've learned about predicates. And then with that, you've learned about modifiers and conjunctions. Some of you have taken a little bit extra steps. You've learned about some discourse markers, but as a whole, you haven't actually been able to visualize an entire textual argument, textual makeup. And that's what I'm trying to help us learn how to do. And we're using Biblearc's phrasing module because there's no other tool on the market that can help us do what Biblearc's phrasing module can help us do. To visualize the interrelationship of all the parts of a text and have our understanding of the text structure, its outline, grow directly out of the Hebrew itself. So we have been able to discern the basis of Israel's calling. We've discerned the nature of Israel's calling. But now we want to get within the nature of Israel's calling section and distinguish what we're seeing. So you have here the means, that's what's in the if section, the means for Israel's calling, for them to fulfill the calling, and the essence. The essence of their calling is actually right here. The calling is not to obey, to keep, and to be. That's the means for becoming the people that God wants them to be. And insofar as they're engaged in meeting the if, the then is automatically going to be operative. So I'm going to go over here to the new block label, look down in the editorial box, and under the section tab, all the way to the far right, you'll see the new block label. Now this is going to work. The label works within the various parts that you have distinguished by section. So unless you put a line in, the new block label is not going to be able to keep it where you want to keep it. Actually, that's not true. It's only the section headings, the new headings that are constrained by the separator lines. The block label is actually determined by what you highlight. So if I want, for example, I could actually take out the separator line here between the protasis and the apodosis, which I've just done, and I could go down here to the new block label. Oh, sorry, I'm all messed up. Just trying to remember here. I actually do need, it is controlled. The block labels are controlled by the separator lines. So let's put in a block label here. What I was thinking of was something else. Let's put in a block label. And you can see now within each separator unit, there are blocks of texts. And I may want to, right here, get a block. I'll make it blue, and I can add a new title. I could say the means for meeting Israel's calling, done. And down here, I could say the essence. And you can see in our label that it's not going to show up very well. So because of that, we might choose, okay, what can I do to actually visualize what I want to see? And that's where you could use another option. You could go first, what we could do is first come here and delete these headings. And now go over to the arrows plus tab. And we could go to new relationship. New relationship, and it says select lines for this new relationship and then click create. So we could click here and then push shift and go all the way down, and now all these lines are clicked, and now I go create, and I could choose my color. I could choose blue, and now I can type in here. I could say the means for meeting Israel's calling. Done. And then I could do it again, new relationship, and just do the last line, create, make it green, and I could do the essence of meeting Israel's calling. Done. So that's another way that you can establish your outline. But the actual purpose, why these boxes were originally created, was for some other purpose. And so for the sake of now, I'm just going to delete these. And I'm going to go back to sections and just put in the block labels. I'm going to put means, done, and essence. And now I'm going to show you some other features under the arrows of what can be done. First off, new relationship. I could do new relationship, highlight all three of these, push create, and note that this is direct object of 19.4a. Done. I could note that this unit here, create, is the protasis, whereas this clause here is the apodosis. If you have purpose or result or restatement, you could put all the different relationships between the various clauses using the new relationship tab. If, for example, you wanted to draw attention to the fact that the me in verse 6 is the same me in 19.4d. For example, you could go new arrow. Select a word to begin drawing the arrow. You could highlight your me here, and then select which word you'd like the arrow to point to. And you could go all the way up to that new arrow, choose your color, whatever it may be, red, and say done. And all of a sudden, you have an arrow in your text. If for every one of these a share clause, you wanted to note that it's actually modifying what precedes rather than what follows, you might want to add a new subordination arrow. Select the word which the subordinate clause or clauses modify. So you start at the end here. So I say you. Now select the subordinate clauses. And I select this one all the way down using the shift key, all the way down to the bottom, and I say create. I could pick my color, and all of a sudden I have an arrow that's marking all that subordination. I could do the same with all these if clauses. I could say new subordination. I'm going to mark that it's going all the way down to the bottom. And now I'm going to pick these 3 if clauses and say create. I'll leave it in green and say done. And now I'm noting that all those if clauses are actually anticipating what follows. But notice that there's an embedded key clause within the last of the if clauses. So I might want to note that and use a different color. So I'm going to note that I'm going up here. Then I'm going to note that I'm coming here. I'm going to say create, and I'm going to use a different color and say done. Now, right at the moment, all of these look funny, but all I have to do is turn off my editing bar. Turn it off. I'm going up to the top right of my screen. I'm just going to turn off editing. And all of a sudden, it looks right. Now, this arrow seems to be, the arrow on my key clause is turned the wrong way, and I'm not sure why that is. Something's a little screwy there, but you're beginning to see the power and the potential of Biblearc's phrasing module. Now, there's one last feature that I want to draw attention to. And to do that, I'm going to expand my text a little bit. And we started in 1904 through 1906. I deleted the bottom of 1906, but I want to move up to 1903. And if I want to do that, I believe, I'm going to try this. I'm going to go up here to 1904 through 6, and I want to go to my passage and just expand, go down to 19, and expand one verse to 3 through 6, and push go. Now I've just added verse 3. Say, I worked on my text hierarchy and then I forgot something. And now all of a sudden, what we're seeing is a new, what I call domain. It's actually a new level of the text. Whereas Moses was talking, Yahweh through Moses was talking in 1904. Yes, Yahweh was talking to Moses in 1904, telling him what he was supposed to tell the people. Now we actually move up and we hear the narrator's voice. So look with me in 19:3. And Moses ascended to God. He went up to God. New clause. No, I need to turn on my editing module. He went up to God, and every clause, you remember, let's go to indent. Every clause we want to put on its own line in text hierarchy. So here's a new clause. It's on its own line. And Moses went up to God, and he called to him. Who did? Who called to who? Yahweh called to him. So Moses ascended, and now we get a new participant. Yahweh is the new actor. A new subject enters in, and Yahweh called to him from the mountain. So we have this shift, and then we get a speech frame. Yahweh called, saying. Now this is actually an infinitive construct of the verb amer. And so infinitives are phrasal, they're phrases, they are verbal nouns, but they're not finite verbs, and so they don't get their own line in text hierarchy. So this is an infinitive construct, and so what follows is now an embedded speech. Everything that we've already worked through in the text hierarchy is an embedded speech, but we just entered into the speech itself, and so we didn't mark it as a speech. But now we're having the chance to mark an embedded discourse. So we come in and we get an embedded speech. And Yahweh called to him, that is to Moses, from the mountain, saying. Now, at this point in the text, you and I need to know that we have a new speaker. We're actually moving from the narrator to the story that he's telling. And within that story, there's a character, in this instance, Yahweh, who's doing the speaking. And so we need to be able to signal that. The first thing that we do is we mark a break. This is a separation. There's an entire shift in the discourse at this point. The narrative is changing, so we need a separator line. So we push done. So we start. Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, new clause, and you shall speak rather, to the sons of Israel. So this is what you shall say. Thus you shall say, this is God speaking. But then what follows, which we already worked through, is what Moses needs to say. So recognize with me that in the Hebrew text, you have a speech, which we already worked through, within a speech. This is embedded material. This is what you need to say. And then the speech itself is like the direct object of the verb. So you have a speech within a speech within a speech. There's 3 levels of discourse, or what I will call in class domains. 3 different domains. Domains are not character specific. No, within the second domain, the narrator could have Yahweh speaking as he does here. Moses could be speaking. A different character could be speaking. But all you've gone is you've altered the perspective to one level of embedded discourse. But within Yahweh's speech, now there's one new level of embedding. And with every level of embedding, I propose that you mark it in 2 ways. Both by highlighting the text through putting it in a block, and by indenting the text 1 tier in, just to visually let you see this is different than what precedes. But there's going to be more, and that's by highlighting it with a block. So let's just see what I'm doing here. The speech act begins in verse 3c. So everything that follows is part of this speech, all the way down to 19:6. So I highlight all of it. All I did was click the tab using, as long as it's under the indent tab in our editing box, I can click one of the tabs within the text and then push shift and go down to the lowest level tab that I want to move, and I'll be able to move all of that discourse at the same time. So this is just how I do it. You're going to gain your own preference for how you want to do it, but I just move. If it's an embedded speech, I'm going to move it 1 tier in, just 1 tier, and I move the entire speech. So now I click it, and this is what we've got. But not only that, we're going to have a speech within a speech. And the New American Standard marked this by double quotes and then moving to single quotes. So we have, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and you shall speak to the sons of Israel. Well, what is Moses supposed to say? That's what this text is. Now, you'll remember 19:4 is already indented, but 19:5 is part of Moses' speech, and it's at the same level right now. If you just touch it, you'll see that it highlights. It's at the same level as we get here, same level. And I want new speeches, embedded speeches, to be moved in 1 level of discourse. So everything that we've already done from 19:4 to the bottom of 19:6, I want to highlight it again and move it in 1 more level. Okay, now we have noted, and I'm going to add a section break. Done. So we've got a shift here of discourse, a shift from one speech act to a new speech act to another speech act. But visually, when I just look at this screen at the moment, I can't tell whether it's just changing of paragraphs or changing of speakers. So to note the change of speakers, I need to highlight those speeches in individual boxes. So God, the narrator is talking in verse 3, but God is talking from 3c all the way down to verse 6. All of those are God's speech, God's words. So I'm going to go down here to arrows plus in my editing box, and I'm going to go to the new box. Notice what I'm going to do. I'm just going to click new box. It says select and unselect the propositions for the new box. Right now, there's nothing selected, but all I want to do is highlight all of God's speech, and it's going to distinguish God's speech from the narrator's words up in verse 3. And God's speech runs from 3c all the way down to 19:6. And I'm going to put it on the English side. Notice that it highlights. I'm going to push shift and highlight. And what that does is it creates a box around all of God's speech act. Now I'm going to say create. And it made it yellow. That's fine. When I'm working through my discourse, I try to keep all the boxes of text character specific. So if Moses is talking, it might be red. If God's talking, it might be blue. And I say done. And just so you can see what it looks like, just turn off the editing box for a second and you'll just see it. Our arrows are there. All of our titles are still there. Our lines are there. Everything is still there, but now there's a distinction between the narrator's speech act and Yahweh's speech act. And if you were doing a text hierarchy of several chapters or an entire book, in one quick glance, you could see every place where Yahweh is speaking. Now notice Yahweh is not the only one who speaks, though. Yahweh speaks and then he tells Moses what he is supposed to say. So we have a speech within a speech, and I need to be able to mark that in my text hierarchy. And I do that by building another box. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to turn on my editing box going up to the top right. Just turn on editing. And I'm going to go to new box again. And remember, what we started with was only Moses' speech, which God was telling him, this is what you need to say to the people. So I type new box, and now within my unit, I'm going to only highlight 19:4 down to 19:6. This is the speech within the speech. And I create, but it needs to be a different color than yellow. And let's say we assign Moses blue. So this is Moses speaking within Yahweh's speech, which is within the narrator's speech. So I say done. I turn off my editing module, and now I see what I have. I have Yahweh speaking, and it goes all the way out. It stretches all the way out to the edge, and that's what tells me that Yahweh's speech is actually part of what we have going on within. That Yahweh's speech is controlling Moses' speech. So Moses' speech is built into Yahweh's speech act. Now, notice we deleted 19:6b, but had I left it, there would have been a clear marker because the text box would have been completed, and we would have returned to only white space, because the narrator then tells us that everything Moses told the people what God told him to say, and everything that he said, the people obeyed. And that's the narrator talking again. So we would have returned to the white, and you would have been able to distinguish a speech within a speech within a speech. So that is the role of that. That's how Biblearc's phrasing module is working. And with every text that we do in the class, you're going to be using this phrasing module and indicating within the text your understanding of the flow. All the while, you could, if you want, add notes. So here at the end of this little video, I'm just going to note for you what that would look like. You go to the arrow down at the bottom where we hid the notes, you push visualize, you grab the top and you bring it up. Now you've got notes. And we might say right off the bat, using bold, main idea of the passage. And later in the semester, you're going to have to create a main idea for every unit that we work through in the book of Deuteronomy. Main idea of the passage. So we might say Yahweh calls Israel to serve as his, or maybe to mediate his presence and display his holiness to the world. That could be our main idea. And this is what God calls Israel to do. And now we want to create an outline. And so we can go up here to H1, the section heading, create an outline, and we say 1, the basis of Israel's calling. Point 2, the nature of Israel's calling. Now we go to H2, which is heading 2, and we could say this is the means for fulfilling the calling. B, the essence of the calling itself. So we start out, verse 4 is, or we could say 19:4 is the basis of Israel's calling. 19 verses 5 and 6 is the nature of Israel's calling. And we could even expand the main idea to include these parts, but every part of my exegetical outline is related to my understanding of the main idea. We could say, in view of Israel's great redemption, that's the basis. Or we could say, because of Israel's great redemption, Yahweh calls Israel to mediate his presence and display his holiness in the world. And then we could even add by hearing his voice, keeping his covenant, and being his treasured possession among all the nations. That captures our understanding of the entire flow of thought, and it's represented within the outline itself. We could add the means if we wanted to. Going to heading 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we could say, hear his voice, keep his covenant, be his treasured possession. So there we have it. We've created an exegetical outline, established the main idea, and all of it grows directly out of our main text. So you can see here, all I did was minimize my screen. So now we can have our outline right next to our text. And you see, we worked in the Hebrew, we corrected our English, we established our understanding of the entire hierarchy of clauses, and we were able to establish not only the hierarchy of causes, but even signal our understanding of the relationship of all the parts. And it was those parts growing directly out of our text hierarchy that became the main points for our outline. I hope that our study here has been helpful. My goal was just to give you an idea how to use Biblearc's phrasing module. May the Lord bless you in this. Thanks for watching this video.